Well, the leading candidates in the Kogi West senatorial election have been reacting to the outcome of the conclusion of last Saturday's exercise. The PDP candidate, Senator Dino Melaye, told Channels Television on telephone that he won the poll, alleging violence and series of malpractices.
I won the election, and the victory of Smart Adeyemi is temporal and evaporative, and I can assure you that in a matter of time, it will be overturned. It will be overturned. He himself, in his conscience, in his good conscience, knows that he's sitting there temporarily, and that is why they cannot even celebrate, because they have conscience, they have blood flowing through their veins and not kerosene. They know that it's an hijack, it's a robbery, and unfortunately, the corpse buried have his legs showing outside. I want to say that their victory is temporal and evaporative. Like I said, we are going to get it back.
In the meantime, his opponent and the winner of the election, Senator Smart Adeyemi, believes he won overwhelmingly.
He marched through the fraudulent means. I didn't know certain things in politics before, I must confess. I didn't know that the level of corruption had degenerated to this level. That explains why people like Dino emerged. But when the whole nation rose, that the truth must be seen to be done, that explains why I won. Look at the margin, over 26,000. Now, what he's afraid of is that we are already studying the legal implication. That all the money Dino has collected, especially this few months he has spent, because the law said he has not been duly elected, he should refund the money to federal government. We have told we are going to take that up with him. Apart from letting go to tribunal, we'll follow him to tribunal. If Dino is actually a legislator, if actually Dino is a senator, after election, you go to tribunal. Why going to INEC to make noise?
Let's now discuss some of the issues raised. I have joining me Mr. Mohammed Haruna, who's an INEC National Commissioner, and also Ms. Safia Bichi, an official of Yaga Africa and election observer. I'd like to thank you both for joining us on the program. All right, I must ask at this point, and this is first to you, Mr. Haruna, what can you tell us about the whereabouts of the returning officer for Niger local government polls? We hear that the returning officer was declared missing days after the election in Tafa local government area.
I'm afraid I'm hearing that from you for the first time. I've been away in Kogi all these days since Wednesday, for the rerun for Kogi West as well as for Ajaokuta. Hello?
Okay, let's look at, what we heard today. The PDP saying that representatives of the electoral umpire met with leaders of the main opposition. Tell us the Commission's position, the process of leading electoral reforms to ensure that our future elections are devoid of violence.
Hi, again, this meeting you're talking about, as I said, I've been away to Kogi, so I wasn't part of this meeting with the PDP. But it's obvious the electoral reform we're talking about. As far as I'm concerned, the root cause of all these problems we've had with our elections, with our democracy, with our politics, is the lack of internal democracy in political parties. Their primaries are anything but, And until we can get that right, until we can get that very foundation right, we will continue to have problems. So really, the ball is in the courts of the political parties.
Ms. Bichi, what are your thoughts on last Saturday elections in Kogi West senatorial district?
Well,
okay. I think the elections went the way it went, be it that even though the election was not marred with violence as we had in the November 16, but there were still a lot of electoral malpractices that went on in the elections. Just like the November 16 elections, we saw a high level of vote buying, community conspiracy, and a lot others in the elections. So again, this also shows that the elections still fall short of electoral integrity, and most of the perpetrators or the major actors were found to be associated with one or two political parties.
Mr. Haruna, when you hear comments coming from an observer on the elections, how do you feel, especially, INEC as the electoral umpire in charge of such elections?
Of course, we feel concerned, especially if it comes from credible observers like Yaga. But Yaga is one of several that observed this election, and I've spoken with a number of them. Plug, for instance, the Situation Room, for instance, of civil society organizations, and they seem to have been happy with the election, with the quality of the election, with the integrity of the election. I've spoken with CDD, that is the Center for Democracy and Development, and they also seem to, have been happy with the quality of the elections this time around.
Let's go back to you, Madam Bichi. There's the recurring phenomenon some observers noted, and that's the card readers, that it failed in certain units. I'll come back to Mr. Haruna to ask him why that happened. But then lawmakers have also, most recently right now, thought about introducing a bill, and that is for stiffer punishments for those who sort of commit violence in elections or carry ballot papers. When you look at maybe some of those reforms coming from the legislature, are you convinced, are you optimistic for our elections still to come?
Yeah, I've always been optimistic about our elections because if you look at where we came from and where we are now, even with the improvement in the side of the Electoral Commission, it will leave you with no option than to be optimistic. But again, it's more than talking. There's what they say, do the talk. And we know that some of the problems we have, or one of the weakest links we have in this electoral process, is the actions or attitude of the political class. And we know that, yes, these lawmakers are also members of this political class. So I think it's not just coming up with stiffer punishments, but it's to look at to do a holistic assessment of the entire process. And this goes back to electoral reforms. There are things that are around electoral reforms, and there are other things that are around attitudinal change. We also need to understand that there are things that as human beings, as people, as civil people, it's no longer fashionable. And that's, for instance, having violence, because no matter how stiff the punishment is, if there's no high level or good level of prosecution, we'll still continue the way we are. At the moment, there are penalties for some of these things, but the question is, how far have we gone with implementing the laws we have at hand? Not to say that coming up with laws or stiffer punishment is not the way out, but I think we need to look at the entire electoral structure. Let's go back to the EMB. The EMB that is in charge of prosecution of electoral offenses. Do they have the capacity to do that? Do we need to unbundle the EMB? These are some of the questions. And I know that some of the answers or recommendations that came in this direction is the fact that we need to come up with an electoral offense commission. So probably bringing that will also help in addressing some of these issues, because it's one thing for people to do something and get away with it. It's another thing for them to do to carry out some of this violence or whatever electoral malpractice it is, and not to get away with it. Because if they don't get away with it...
If I may at this point, tell us quickly now, Mr. Haruna, the recurrent phenomena of the card readers malfunctioning. We hear in two words in Kogi West district that they failed to work. As brief as you can.
I'm not aware that card readers failed to work, because we have a situation room where we track all the operations in the field, and all of them reported, none of them reported any malfunctioning of card readers. Perhaps there was, but it didn't really come to my notice.
In our concluding moments on this issue, I must ask you, Mr. Haruna, pray tell, did you at any point have any major concerns about the quality of the most recent elections we've had from last Saturday backwards now? Have you, given a thought as to perhaps some of the concerns that you had?
Yes, I had concerns initially, For Ajaokuta, for instance, which is a federal constituency, I was worried that the narrow of the margin of lead was just five votes between, the APC and the runner-up. That kind of narrow distance could breed violence. Fortunately, nothing of such happened. The same thing with the Kogi West senatorial election. There were no reports of violence. And of course, the issue that Sefia Bichi raised of vote buying, it seems to come in all sorts of shapes and sizes now, and some of them very, very difficult, very hard, if not impossible to detect. And it's a real cause for worry. So such hitches may have been there, but there has been a substantial, this with the election itself was substantially okay. So that was why we were able to declare winners in both the Ajaokuta federal constituency.
All right, finally to you, Ms. Bichi, if we have cases where card readers fail to work, are you optimistic about the idea of electronic voting for our future elections? Briefly, please.
Yeah, I'm optimistic about it, more especially when it comes to accreditation and probably transmission of result. I think what we need to do is to look at the mechanism and the technology. And I also want to warn that technology is not the silver bullet to our elections. And we've also known that developed clients like the UK, when they first introduced electronic voting, they also had challenges. So in as much as we're clamoring for that, I believe that it will make our process much better than it is now. But again, we also need to look at the infrastructure well, so that we will not run into, it's just like driving yourself into an ocean. But I think it will take our elections to a greater height. We've seen the role of technology in not just elections or democratic processes. We've seen that in the business area. This is where we can borrow a leaf from, I guess.
All right, we'd like to appreciate your time, Ms. Sefia Bichi, official of Yaga Africa, and Mr. Mohammed Haruna. Thank you so much for joining us at this time.